So I think we'll make a start. Now, my name is Leonie Cooper, and I'm one of the members of the National Executive of SERA, and I'm also the London Assembly, one of the 25 London Assembly members representing Merton and Wandsworth. And for the last 3.5 years, I've been chairing or deputy chairing the Environment and Energy Committee. And it was at my instigation that we did our first report ever through the GLA, the Greater London Authority, on single-use plastics, which has now led to a very large programme of water refill points being installed across London, I'm very pleased to say. It kind of snowballed from my report, the Mayor taking it on board, David Attenborough, the Mayor doubling the amount of money he was going to put into that. Thames Water got involved, and it's now a very large programme, saving a lot of plastic, which is why I'm very pleased to be chairing this on behalf of SERA. Since then, moved on to produce another report on single-use plastics called Unflushables, working extensively with looking at what people insist on putting down the loo, that is also full of plastic and therefore causes huge problems in the sewer system, and so on and so forth. So I've been looking at it from period products, incontinence pads, everything where plastic is, and there's a lot of plastic, as we know. And as we also know, it is something that's produced using fossil fuel. So we really need to wean ourselves off our obsession and dependence on plastic. We've got a fantastic panel. Can I just say that all our other events in this room have been absolutely packed out. There's no disrespect to this panel at all, I think, but somehow the conference has altered its arrangements today as a result of 11 people. So 11-0, I think we could say, against Boris Johnson. Has he actually won any parliamentary vote? I don't think. No, none at all. None at all. Looks like tomorrow might be yet another bad day for the Prime Minister. That's if he can be bothered to show up at all. Who knows? Doesn't really seem to pay much attention to anything. So even though people are coming in and even though things have changed, we are going to go ahead with the meeting, obviously, and I think we're going to hear some really interesting contributions. We're going to start with Sandy Martin, who is leading on a number of, can I say a number of areas relating to rubbish?
You can say I'm a shadow rubbish minister.
Well, I'm not going to say you're the rubbish shadow minister, because obviously that would just be rude. But we'll start with Sandy, and then we'll go on to Anna, and then we'll hear from our other contributors as well. So I'm going to pass over to Sandy now.
Thank you, Leonie. Well, yes, I'm the Shadow Minister for Waste and Recycling. I'm the first one that Labour has ever had. And it was a decision taken by the front bench in October of last year, because following Blue Planet, following other television programmes, following demonstrations, and following vast numbers of letters, emails, and so on, especially from children, but also from lots of other people as well, we realised that this was an issue where we needed a specific response on waste, not just on plastics, but clearly plastic was in there right at the very top of the public agenda. And there was some work already being done, in particular on the prevalence of plastic in the oceans and in water. I'm working in the Shadow DEFRA team with Sue Hayman, who does agriculture and fisheries and pollution and all sorts of other things as well. And my counterpart, who does everything wet, so I'm the rubbish minister, Luke is the wet minister, but he did some work about the prevalence of plastic in people's poo. I actually bought him a little plastic poo as a present to show my appreciation. But there is a real problem with the prevalence of plastic throughout the biosphere. Plastic in the compost that gets ploughed into our fields, plastic in the oceans, as I said, plastic in the materials that are incinerated, and who knows in some cases whether some of those are polymers that are going in for incineration may or may not be releasing unhelpful emissions. I don't know. I'm not absolutely certain that the industry knows either. It's very difficult to pin down some of the facts that are available. So I am very pleased to have a glamorous assistant to help me do that, who's sitting at the back here, who also works for SERA, but he works part-time for SERA and part-time for me. And so if any of these statistics are wrong, then that's Phil's fault. But so far as we can pin down, about 60% of packaging is plastic. 99% of that packaging, of that plastic packaging, is made from fossil fuels. And if we continue to increase the amount of plastic we use in packaging in this country and in the world, about 13% of the total global carbon emissions by 2050 would be accounted for by the plastics that we are producing. Clearly, that cannot be done. The government introduced producer responsibility notice and actually producer export. I can't remember what Phil, what is it? PERN, producer export recovery notes. That's right, yeah. Unfortunately, what appears to have happened, and I'm very much dependent on what the Environmental Audit Committee came back with on this one, but what appears to have happened is the producer export recovery notes seem to have turned out to have been a license to export waste to the third world. And that is a large part of the problem of ocean plastics, because of course, clearly, if we're exporting our plastic to a country where they do not have the infrastructure to recycle it properly, there is always a very strong temptation, or indeed no other way that they can deal with it at all, but just to throw it into the sea. And that has happened in Malaysia, in Indonesia. Some very, very good work was done by Friends of the Earth on plastics entering the ocean. And I've been meeting with people for the last 8 or 9 months talking about a lot of these issues. Now, it's been quite a steep learning curve for me. I did know a little bit about waste and recycling before I took on the job. We have had all sorts of other distractions. I mean, obviously the B word, but also we've had an agriculture bill, we've had a fisheries bill. We work as a team. It's not always possible for me to focus on the main part of my role. We have to do what comes up. And so we have produced a strategy document for the Labour Party. It's not yet been passed by the leadership. It's sit there in the bag behind me, but I can't actually tell you exactly what's in there because I need to get that signed off. It's got to fit in with our local government commitments, and it's also got to fit in with the Treasury's commitments. But I can tell you that we've run it past the major voluntary sector bodies, and we have had a very, very good sense that we are on board. And Leonie, you were at that stakeholder meeting. I don't think there was anybody there who felt that we were on the wrong track. My brief here for you today, I'm sorry it sounds a little bit, it sounds a bit pernickety, but I think it needs to be done, is to talk to you about the government's failure and Labour's answers. And the reason I think it needs to be done is not because I like dwelling on what the Conservatives have been doing, but because I know that in the coming election they are going to be going out there and saying, oh, well, we're going to do this, and oh, well, we're going to do that, and oh, we've said we're going to do this, and we've said we're going to do that. And we've already seen quite a lot of that. Our Waste, Our Resources actually had some good things in it. The only problem is, firstly, there is no indication that it will actually happen. Secondly, some of the consultations that they said they were going to launch are not due to be launched until 2023, which is long after the present government is finished. Thirdly, some of the consultations which they have carried out, they're now going out to fresh consultation. And fourthly, in some cases, they've rowed back from what they said they were going to do because of lobbying from the industry. And the most obvious example of that is the latte levy, the so-called latte levy, the disposable cup charge. Now, I am not able, I don't think anybody is able to say what the Conservatives would do if they were in government with an overall majority and Gove was still Secretary of State for the environment, but none of that is likely to happen. And there has been no indication that I can see that any of the stuff that they've been saying about the environment over the last 2 years is actually being taken seriously by them, and I don't see why it should be taken seriously by us. However, we can learn from some of the things in that document, and whatever we do, I can pledge to you that our approach to waste and resources will be more coherent, more comprehensive, and more effective than anything put forward by the Conservatives in our waste, our resources. One of the issues that they had was about collection for recycling. The local authorities, of course, are expected to do the vast bulk of that, and yet there was no indication of where the financial support was going to come from, either the increased revenue cost for being more comprehensive in the recycling that you're collecting, or the capital costs, the serious capital costs involved in improving, changing the collection regime. Some local authorities have done quite a lot of things anyway, but it is becoming increasingly impossible for local authorities to do what they want to do simply because they have been so stripped of their finances and indeed in some cases stripped of their powers as well. The second thing I would say about that is that while it talks about collecting plastics in recycling systems, it doesn't say anything very much about making sure that it is actually recycled. And my view about recyclable plastic is there's no point in calling a plastic recyclable if it's not actually recycled. And if it's going to be actually recycled, you've got to know that it's been collected, that it's been sorted, that it has been turned into something else and that other thing has been used. You have got to close that loop. And unless and until you close that loop, and you can show that you've closed that loop, talking about it being recycled is somewhat pointless. But the biggest hole in the government's strategy is that it says very little about reduction. And reduction of waste is always better, has to be better than recycling. And in particular with plastics. Clearly, with the majority of plastics being made from fossil fuels, if we are going to cut down to zero the amount of fossil fuels that we're taking out of the ground, we're going to have to reduce the amount of plastic that we're creating in the first place. All of our emphasis needs to be primarily on reduction, and only then on recycling those things that we cannot reduce. So reusable cups, reusable bags, reusable containers, things which do not get thrown away after each use. There will also be some role for substitution. But when we talk about substitution, I do think we need to be careful to do whole life carbon audits on substitute materials. There is no point in substituting something which actually has a higher carbon footprint simply because you don't like the word plastic. So for instance, in the House of Commons recently, I've seen that we're getting water in aluminium containers. Now, I haven't done the whole life carbon audit, but my guess is that selling people water in aluminium containers is even more stupid than selling them water in plastic bottles. The best way, actually, of drinking water is to turn on something called a tap or to get it from one of Leonie's water fountains. And so we really need to move away from this knee-jerk reaction against certain substances and against certain plastics. On the other hand, of course, there are different types of plastic. And some types of plastic are far easier to recycle. Some types of plastic are far less damaging to the environment than others. There are some bad plastics, and I have yet to hear a really convincing argument for why we should continue to allow the manufacture of expanded polystyrene or indeed of black plastic. I am very pleased to see that oxo-degradable plastics, those are the ones where sunlight actually causes it to break down into little fragments which then just sit around in the environment forever. Those have now been banned in Europe, and we have actually followed that ban here in this country. I'm glad to hear about that. On the other hand, there are some very eminently recyclable plastics, HDPE that you get your milk in, or PET that you buy drinks in. They are eminently recyclable, and if they are recyclable, then we need to make sure that they're recycled. And one of the ways of assuring that is to have a deposit return scheme. I'm not necessarily telling you that what the price will be or whatever, but I am firmly convinced that we do need to have a deposit return scheme of some sort in this country. And when you look at other countries which have got them, and in particular Germany, you can see that it actually works very well. So I think we've got a lot that we can learn from about how to make a deposit return scheme work, and we will need to make sure that it's set at the right price and organised in the right sort of way to achieve that level of recycling. I think in Germany it's 97% or something of single-use bottles are recycled. I mean, that is just phenomenal. If we can achieve that, then that is well worth doing. Compostable plastics present a particular problem, and the real problem with compostable plastics is that sometimes people don't know which is which. Very often people don't know which is which. If compostable plastics get into a plastic recycling system, then they're not necessarily going to improve the ability of that plastic to be recycled. But even more damaging, if non-compostable plastics get into the compostable waste stream because people think they're compostable, then that creates amounts of plastic which damage the value of the compost. So in my view, there are cases where compostable plastic does make real sense, and in particular, obviously, if we're going to have comprehensive food waste collections, we need to make sure that they're collected in something, in which case we need bags, tea bags, coffee pods, whatever. Anything which is intimately involved with food waste needs to also be compostable. The only way we can make sure that every plastic in that case is compostable is by regulation. And so I think that there is a role for regulation as well as for financial instruments. Whatever we do, it needs to be coherent, and it needs to be coherent across all elements of the waste stream. We need to work with local authorities. I went to beginning of August to Wales and saw what is being done in Wales. It's an absolutely brilliant lesson for those of us here in England. There's still a way to go. There are still things that they can do, but places like Newport are recycling far heavier than almost every local authority here in England, and they're doing things in a coherent way, and the reason they're doing them in a coherent way is because the first thing the Welsh Government decided to do when it decided to deal with the waste problem was sat down with the local authorities and talked to the local authorities about what they could do and what they couldn't do, how much it was going to cost, where the money was going to come from. So we have got to do something in conjunction with the local authorities, and I believe we need to do something in conjunction with the Welsh and Scottish assemblies as well, because we need a policy which enables producers and the waste industry to work with whatever regulations come in. And it's going to be much more difficult to do that if we have different regimes in Scotland, Wales, and England. In general, we need to make sure that we incentivize reduction ahead of recycling. We need to make sure that the recycling regime that we have is properly financed, and it's being financed by the right people. We know that if the general public is enabled to do the right thing, that they will do so, but at the moment, nobody has the faintest idea what they're meant to be doing, which is a good reason for having a coherent national programme. Things need to be properly labelled. We need consistent collection regimes across the United Kingdom, and in summary, where we continue to use plastics, we should only do so where it is the right thing for the planet and not just because it's right for profits.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to ask you to hold your thoughts for any points that you might want to put to Sandy. We're just going to bring in the other speakers, and I'm going to start with Anna McMorrin, who is a member of the EAC, the Environment Audit Committee, which has done these things of bringing very much into the public eye. The latte levy was very much coined by them. Also, more recently, their report on fast fashion, which very sadly I'm not really sure I can call them the government with a majority of -42, but whoever they are who claim to be the Prime Minister and his cohorts have unfortunately not shown any interest in taking that forward. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I think I'll start by just saying that I'm a Welsh Labour MP, so I am incredibly proud of what Wales has done as a nation in in bringing third in the world at household recycling rates. Third in the world. That is fantastic. A lot more to be done. But I'll just tell you a bit before I start about my background. I was a Welsh government. I actually brought in the legislation and the strategy to bring us forward, to make us third in the world. I was a special advisor brought in after working with Friends of the Earth as a campaigner on climate targets. So I was too good a campaigner, and the Welsh government said yes, they would do it, but they didn't know how. So they asked me to go and join them to work out how. It's much harder to be delivering in government than it is on the outside trying to be a campaigner asking for that. I'm sure our campaigners would agree with that. But, you know, in Welsh Government went a long way, and we delivered a lot. We were the first country to deliver the 5p charge on carrier bags, and I'm very proud to have brought that policy to fruition. And England's followed, Scotland followed, and now we have it across the whole of the UK, hugely reducing the amount of waste and carrier bags. I want to see that go further because there's still too many, and perhaps bring about a ban on that altogether. But in Parliament, I was elected 2 years ago. I have brought forward a bill, the Plastic and Packaging Extended Producer Responsibility Bill. That bill, I thought, had gone until this morning, when we've realised that, no, everything is back on the agenda. And the unproroguing, is that a word? The unproroguing of Parliament...
It is now.
has meant that it's still there. It's still very much a live bill. So my background in bringing forward the waste strategy in Wales, to making that difference across communities in Wales, across industry, businesses, reworking the whole infrastructure within Wales, meant that I understood a little bit more, perhaps, than most people about the need to fundamentally reform how the waste industry works. And that's what's needed. Sandy touched upon it, the compliance system. We have 52 compliance system organisations with PERNs or PRNs that are needed by producers when they produce their waste. That basically means it's a race to the bottom. And with those export notes or notes, compliance notes, they use that to do the bare minimum. Some of them do better than others. Some of them are very frustrated. Some producers are frustrated because they can't go further. So the need is there to fundamentally change and shift this system. So my bill proposes that. And as a backbench bill, obviously, it is very difficult to get on the statute books. It's very, very difficult to become an act. So I brought a coalition together for industry groups, industry bodies, producers, local authorities, Friends of the Earth, all coming together to work out, to actually say, we need to do this. Michael Gove talked the talk, but did not walk the walk at all. He liked to think he did. Therese Coffey, who was the minister responsible, she's very good at dismissing anything and just trying to look like she was leading on this. Heaven knows what she's doing in DWP. But this is such a critical issue across the world now that we've got to be leaders in the country, leaders in the UK. And this is not, the reason I'm so passionate about this is this can't be done in the devolved nations or just, it's got to be done as a whole across the whole of the UK. The waste industry needs huge reform. And we need to put that responsibility, need to give that responsibility back to producers. They must take that ownership, take that responsibility and be responsible for their packaging, from the beginning, from the production, the creation, the innovation, right through to the end, to the cleanup. It's so, so important that that comes about, and that is what my bill proposes. So we'll see where that goes now with Parliament being unprorogued. But I will continue to do this and working with our DEFRA front bench on this, because I know that it's not just enough to say it, we've got to actually do it. I was in the Arctic last year with the EAC, and the devastation there, the impact of packaging and plastics on those pristine waters, plastics being found in the fish. Fishermen there I was speaking to, who, you know, it's not an area where people go, obviously not. No people go there. But we are seeing waste washed up from all over the world, and that ends up in the stomachs of polar bears. That means that it ends up in our ecosystems. It permeates through the ice, and it's causing destruction. So when we hear Greta Thunberg yesterday talking about the threat to our planet, that includes dealing with our waste system. And it might be very dry, it might be very dull, and to try and work out what we need to do with our waste industry. But it's so, so important for the future, for our future generations, for our children. And it's only by engaging people in that process. We need top-down, the regulation, the legislation to change, but we also need bottom-up behaviour change as well. So I think, shall I stop there? And I haven't talked about the EAC yet, but but there we go.
I think that's a great place to stop, and we can ask you more about that. Thank
Yeah.
you, Anna, for that. Because it's great to hear going from campaigning and going in and changing something in Wales is the most fantastic system. I was there in August as well, and it is just so easy to undertake the recycling. And I had the same experience in City Hall, having got the mention of plastic into the Mayor's draft environment strategy. I then had a massive team of his staff all came to see me and say, well, it's in there now. We know nothing about how to take this forward. Almost saying, it's your fault. Saying, what do we do next? And I knew that ZSL, Zoological Society London, London Zoo, was working with Selfridges, and they'd been doing a whole project on how to install water fountains. And they came into City Hall and then advised the mayoral team. So they went, and they're still doing a lot of that campaigning around the world. Which brings me on to our next speaker, who is going to talk about campaigning and is going to talk about the difference that Friends of the Earth, as well as ZSL, has been making on this. So I'll bring in Julian at this point.
Hi, thank you very much. Well, it's great to be here. Thanks, SERA, for hosting and inviting us there, and great to be amongst fellow campaigners. So let's just remind ourselves of the problem that we're dealing with here with plastic pollution, because I guess what's obvious to many of us, we've all seen the pictures of the animals that are snagged by plastic, the stomachs full of it, and we can imagine, you know, the unimaginable suffering that went along with that. Perhaps less well known is microplastics. The EAC have done great work looking at microplastics, which is either plastic that was released as very small particles rubbed off of clothes and such like, which I'll come back to, or which are broken down particles from the larger plastics, that packaging and such like. And they're perhaps more insidiously harmful and dangerous because they're getting right at the bottom of the food chain, and they take with them all the toxic chemicals associated with making the plastics in the first place, the byproducts of that, of the breakdown of those plastics. I'm talking about the flame retardants and chemicals added to like bisphenol A and things like that to give the plastic different qualities, its bendiness, its colour and such like. Many of which we're now waking up to the serious toxicological issues associated with. And on top of those, you've got persistent organic pollutants, to use the jargon, that have been in the environment for a long time that stick to these plastics. So they hoover them up And one study showed that they were up to 1 million times more toxic than the surrounding seawater because of that. So all of this is going in at the bottom of the food chain, and it's ending up in those fish, it's ending up in those polar bears. But of course, it's also ending up potentially in human diets as well. We know that people are eating fish, but we're breathing it because it's coming from car tyres and brake dust and such like, and rubbing off of furniture and so on. So plastic pollution, it's a pervasive problem, and it's more than packaging, which is what many of us think of, as important as a sort of fraction as that is, and it's a large fraction. Plastic pollution, where else does it come from? Well, how many of us realise that maybe the largest other portion comes from car tyres? Did you ever wonder where the tyre tread went when it went bald? I didn't. But some analysis reckons up to a fifth of plastic pollution entering the environment comes from car tyres, a tenth of it from synthetic clothing. So the increasing problem of fast fashion, we know about the water problems, but what we should do, I hope we're getting to grips with that as a society, as people, and the climate problems with fast fashion, and of course plastic pollution is also a serious issue. And so what I'm saying here is that the problem of plastic pollution is large and complex. There are many different sources of plastic pollution, some of which we can deal with right now. We can ban polystyrene, we can ban black plastic trays, we can ban coffee stirrers made of plastic and a few things like that, but others will take more time to work out how to deal with it. Another problem, of course, with plastic, and this was touched on earlier on, yes, more than 99% of plastic is made from fossil fuels. The plastic pollution crisis is very much part of the climate crisis, the climate emergency. Huge amounts of fossil fuels, be that gas, be that oil, increasingly even coal. China looking to repurpose its coal industry. We're not going to burn it in our power stations because we're signed up not to doing that under global agreements, but we'll make plastic out of it instead. Huge amounts of energy going into, from fossil fuels, making the plastic, processing the plastic, and then of course, because it can only be recycled a limited number of times, what happens to it? It's going into landfill. Increasingly, it's going into incinerators, even worse than landfill. Don't let anyone tell you that's renewable energy or green energy. When you're burning plastic in an incinerator, you're burning a fossil fuel in about the least efficient way that you can do. And all of these things contribute towards plastic being a climate catastrophe in its own right. And Adair Turner's, who was the chair of the Committee on Climate Change, and his more recent outfit looking at what we need to do to reduce emissions, estimated the Energy Transitions Authority, I think, Association, I can't remember, estimated that if we carry on business as usual production of plastic, then plastic will account for, I think it was a third of the available carbon budget for a 2 degrees C world by 2050. I don't know why they went with 2 degrees, because there's wide consensus that 2 degrees is going to do way too much harm. 1.5 degrees does way too much harm from the world. 2 degrees can be taken off the table. So plastic would account for an even larger portion of the carbon budget then, under a 1.5 degree world. So there's a right way and there's a wrong way to respond to the plastic pollution crisis, or wrong ways and right ways. And the wrong ways are to try and recycle our way out of it. Now, recycling is a good thing, and we should recycle as much as we can. And there has been good offer of commitments from the government as to whether they will turn into actual good commitments. Well, we're right to question that, because who knows what's happening with anything that was proposed recently. But there were suggestions for improvements on recycling rate that are welcome, and a bit of a turnaround on where the debate has been over the last few years. But recycling, whilst a good thing, has to be the least good thing. The focus has to be on reduce and reuse. And recycling cannot possibly keep up with an ever-increasing production of plastic. The flyer for this event talked about a 40% increase of plastic production in the next decade, which is absolutely right. That's what we're looking at. The plastics industry is looking at a 400% increase in plastic production by 2050. And recycling says little about production. But another wrong way is to simply substitute plastic for something else. And you're absolutely right to point that out. We could be out of the frying pan into the fire if we just go for a wholesale switch from plastic to card, and if the card all comes from the Amazon, then how much of an improvement is that, and such like. The right way to deal with the plastic pollution crisis is to look at a more fundamental shift in how we run the economy, in how we design our business models, not just the product, but the business models altogether. And that involves that focus on reduce and that focus on reuse. And we're seeing really exciting things happening now. We had an announcement at Davos, of all places. Actually, quite good announcements tend to be made at Davos as to whether they actually then carry on into the real world. That's another question. But an announcement of a thing called The Loop, which was some of the biggest brands in the world saying that they are going to introduce reusable packaging systems in New York and Paris earlier in this year, and we're waiting for the London launch soon. We're seeing some of the big stadiums, and Friends of the Earth is just doing some work on this at the moment, introducing reusable pint cups. Manchester City told us that they were getting through 29,000 of those single-use pint cups per game. 29,000. They're replacing those with, and as are Arsenal, and Spurs are trialling it, and we're hoping that others will take this on as well, with reusable cups, each of which can be used on average 100 times. Imagine the amount of plastic that is done away with, that isn't even produced and used in the first place because you have a reusable alternative there. And we can see that rolling out in all sorts of other ways across the economy. And this is why I like to say that if we deal with the plastic pollution crisis in the right way, then we will do so much more than deal with the plastic pollution crisis. We will make massive inroads into climate, into biodiversity, into all the other challenges that we're facing. Because let's look at fashion. If we can look at changing the way that we wear and we sell and we use clothes, then we'll be the better made, but perhaps we have more of a sharing society around garments that tend to be just whistled through instead of those sorts of things. Then again, you're making inroads in how much plastic pollution is released and so on. Plastic is now a really strong argument for more and better public transport. Air pollution has rightly really gone up on the agenda. A lot of the air pollution that we are breathing from traffic is plastic. It's the number one priority for parents. Which school they send their children to is air pollution. And plastic is a big part of that. What does that tell us? Well, we can design better tyres, but actually the modal shift is a shift to public transport, isn't it? Fewer tyres on the road in the first place. So coming to what we need to do about this, and I'm wrapping up, so this will be really quick. Yes, we need to recycle more. We need simpler recycling systems and all the rest of it. But as I said, there's a limit to what recycling can do for us. And after only a few cycles, you end up in an incinerator increasingly anyway, if you're a plastic bottle, or you're downcycled into a fleece jacket or a cycle path, at which point you just slowly shed more plastic into the environment. We have to focus on reduce. We have to focus on reuse, those business model changes. And you're absolutely right, that's what we need to see the focus on from government. But because this is a really complicated problem, what we need is a focus on getting rid of the needless plastics, the needless uses of plastics, or other single-use materials right now. But where we have trickier uses, hard to replace uses, such as in clothes, if we just made a wholesale switch from plastic to cotton, very much from one catastrophe to another. So the answer to that isn't obvious. Same with car tyres and so on. And that's why we need to take an approach that SERA is rightly celebrating here. 10 years of the Climate Change Act. Plastic pollution emissions, very analogous to carbon emissions. And so we need legislation that locks this and future governments into getting emissions down to zero or as close as we can manage. And holding the governments today and the future governments to account in dealing with this problem on an evidence-based process, which is what the Committee on Climate Change requires the government to do now. And so that's very much what Friends of the Earth we conceived, and we led the campaign for the Climate Change Act, and it was a Labour government that delivered that Climate Change Act. Everybody here should be proud of that legacy, and my plea is that we look to repeat that for plastic as well. Thank you.
Now, I'm going to ask our last two speakers, who are actually both the Port of London Authority is supporting this event and Viridor is supporting this event. I'm going to bring them both in and then we have some time for some questions. And I'm going to start with Tanya, who is sitting next to the Port of London Authority's amazing belly full of fish, which, as you can see, it's made out of plastic. Tanya also spends some of her time examining the stuff that ends up in the River Thames. And my report on single single-use plastic water bottles had the research in there that shows that 75% of the flounder in the River Thames are full of plastic. So, you know, building on what everyone else is saying, it's getting everywhere. We're too careless. We really need to sort ourselves out. Tanya.
Thank you, and thank you for allowing us to tell you about how we are quite literally tackling the problem downstream. I make no apology of the pun. We are dealing with the issue once it's in quite a challenging environment, in an estuary environment, and the other speakers have spoken about some of the ecological impacts that has had in far-flung oceans. It's also a very local issue. We are finding it up at Chelsea, right in the heart of London. We are seeing mounds of wet wipes and mounds of bottles being collected by the tide. The Thames is literally spitting it out. Now, the Port of London Authority doesn't seem like a logical organisation to be tackling that sort of issue, but for decades we have been clearing the Thames of debris. In the 1970s, it was large items like trees that were causing impacts on navigation, bringing trade into London, taking it off the roads. Nowadays, while the volume is still very high, the weight is much, much lower. So we're going from 900 tonnes to about 200 tonnes. But that still will fill in a year the Blackwall Tunnel bore. That's an awful lot of plastic, and we are only skimming the surface. So in 2014, we launched a Cleaner Thames project and campaign in partnership with Thames 21, our clean-up volunteers. With Tideway, who are the super sewer, who will be taking a lot of the sewage discharges and hopefully some of the sewage-derived litter that shouldn't be ending up in the river. And Royal Holloway, who were the academic partners who Leonie's fact has come from, the 75% in flounder, which are dinner plate fish in the Thames. This particular sculpture was done by a local artist who came out on the Thames in very few hours, collected all that litter and created this art just on one site. That site has been cleared time and time again as the tide leaves more and more litter. So we are continuing to tackle this issue. It's very difficult to tell people that there is an issue just although they commute to work over the bridges and come to London Bridge, cross the bridge. Many people will leave their litter on the edge of the bridge instead of by the bin or on the floor because that's littering, or they'll wedge it into a grate because that's called, we now term that tidy littering. The problem with that is the grates generally are surface water outfalls. They drain straight into the Thames, as do the litter on the bank, on the bridge arches and on the walls, straight into the Thames. And unfortunately, being an estuary, it flows 15 kilometres in and only 13 out. So most of the litter that's ever fallen in the Thames, except what we've been able to capture, is retained. We now have these mountains of wet wipes where the Thames effectively is collecting it for us. Hopefully, with the installation of the Tideway Tunnel, we may see that reduce, but ultimately, as a port authority, that is a long way upstream to stop that intervention. And we're continuing to work with the likes of Paul Rose, which is the National Geographic explorer, to try and tackle some of those issues. But we now have secondary plastics. So in microbeads, we have predominance of microbeads in the Thames. We have secondary plastics. So these are plastics that were right at the very beginning of use of plastic items that have basically been tossed around by the Thames, broken up into smaller and smaller pieces. So we have now convened with the GLA and ZSL and a number of other NGOs and academic partners, the Thames Litter Forum, to tackle that very local issue. The problem is we are very local and getting enough movement. We have great speed in London, but we need to tackle it across the 300 kilometres of bank that the estuary presents to spill litter into the environment. Thank you.
Now, and obviously, as you would imagine, I've worked closely with the Port of London Authority, and it's very good to have them. I think this is the first time that you've spoken at a SERA meeting. We have had Viridor on our platforms before, and they do and they've also came along and gave some evidence at one of my sessions in the Environment Committee in City Hall, and are very involved in collecting the plastic to try and stop it getting into the environment, and also have some energy from waste plants. So may have a slightly different perspective on that, but I'm going to pass over to Paul to make some contributions now as well. Paul.
Yes, well, thank you. I'm Paul Ringham. I'm the Commercial Director of Viridor. Viridor is the largest UK-owned resources and energy recovery company. And we're part of the Pennon Group, which is a FTSE 250 company. We look upon ourselves as a very responsible operator in this area. And I'll come on to that a little bit later on when we talk briefly on waste crime, which is having a big impact on some of the agendas we've talked about here today. But in summary, there's not much you can argue with that anyone has said on this panel. But the point I would say is that it's not going to change overnight. So as a responsible producer, we're trying to work out how we can become part of the solution in the immediate and short term. And we are already the largest reprocessor of HDPE and PET, which, as Sandy says, these are the good plastics that you can effectively recycle many, many times. We were at the forefront of plastics recycling. We've had a plant in Skelmersdale that's been running for at least 30 years, and we've got one of the biggest plastic sortation plants in Rochester. And we've made two big announcements recently at our year-end announcement. We're going to invest £65 million in what will be the largest UK multi-polymer reprocessing plant down in Avonmouth. And the reason it's positioned in Avonmouth is that it's going to be co-located with one of our ERFs, our energy recovery facilities, and it's going to take the power off of that to reprocess the plastic. It's going to be, as I say, the largest one in the UK, and it's something that we are very proud of. It's been a bold step, and we've worked very closely with the producers, with the retailers, with the local authorities, because we want to design a process that is going to address the problems of the plastics that are being produced today and that are in the system. And we've got to try and stop them getting in the system. That is our key objective. Once they're deep in the system, they're a hell of a lot harder to treat. The second announcement we've made is that by the end of next year, our corporate aim is to stop any recycling, any export of plastics. At the moment, of the 1 million tonnes that is collected of plastic in the UK, 2/3 of it is still exported to overseas, usually the Far Eastern markets. And this is where I touch on waste crime, because there are a lot of unscrupulous operators that will export it. They won't have done their proper checks, compliance, regulatory, end user checks to make sure it's going to a responsible reprocessor, and that's where you end up with it being stockpiled on the side of Indonesian mountains, which is absolutely appalling. So we look upon ourselves as very much a responsible operator who wants to be part of this solution. And we see the solution before we have some of those real, and you're absolutely right, we need a big seismic shift. But that's not going to happen in the immediate. It's probably not going to happen for a number of years to come. So we need to deal with the problem here and now. That's what we're trying to do. And we're putting our own money behind it in order to make it happen. The next thing I'd just like to touch on is what we think needs to happen in order to get the plastics agenda really going and really moving in the right direction. And absolutely agree with what a number of people have said. The resources and waste strategy had a lot of good things in it. When is it really going to get converted to action? You know, again, you can't argue with some of the concepts, but as someone said, they're only out to consultation, they're being reconsulted on. There's a lot of very difficult, complex issues, and the one reform that I would really say, two people have mentioned it here, the PRN regime, and more importantly, the PERN, which is the export PRNs. They actively incentivize people to export not just plastics, a number of other recyclables that should be being processed in the UK. So that has got to change. And if it doesn't, we are going to be pushing water uphill. The second thing I'd say is investment in general recycling infrastructure hasn't really happened for the last 10 years. And that means that the plastic that we're trying to recycle makes it so much harder before you can even get it in the reprocessing plant. And the money at the moment, and I absolutely get it, the local authorities have got some big decisions to make about where they put their funding. But we, as a private sector player, are trying to work with the local authorities. We've done it in Suffolk County Council, where we're entering into partnerships with them we will invest in the material recycling facilities on the back of coming up with a sensible, and I stress sensible, contract to deal with the dry mixed recyclate for the next number of years. The reason we like that is that gives us the feedstock that we can control, we can manage it in a proper, orderly way, and recycle it and reprocess it properly. Third thing I'd say is we've got to be able to look upon recycling as an industry, and therefore it must make a sensible return. Otherwise, the investment won't be there, the innovation won't be there. So it's not, I would never apologise for people making sensible returns in the way they recycle, because that's the only way it's really going to grow and really going to get critical mass. But it's got to be sensible returns. We don't want people profiteering, and again, that links back to the waste crime agenda. And then finally, on the key drivers we've got, it really is the change in customer behaviour. And when I say customer, the people that are recycling the material in the first place. We did our recycling index for 2019, which is a survey we go out and we test the attitudes, the thinking of people that are actually doing the recycling. And astoundingly, only 1 in 3 people still fully understand which bin their recycling needs to go in. 1 in 3, that's 34%. And that is, and the most interesting fact, that fell from last year. The other one that really hit home was 46% felt they didn't have enough information to actually work out what they should be doing generally across recycling, not just putting it in the right bin. And again, it comes down to the pressures that the local authorities have on. A lot of the education programs and campaigns that used to be run have stopped. And as soon as you stop running them, behaviours change, and they change in a bad way. And that's when you get contamination into the recyclate. Contamination in the recyclate's a bad thing. People can't process it, and then you have to dispose of it in alternate ways, which we are desperate to avoid. So just to wrap up, I know you want to get to questions. It is a really difficult problem that we're trying to address, but responsible operators like Viridor and like some of our competitors are trying to do it in the right way. I'm very optimistic in what is happening, both in the industry, but also in the public perception of what they need to do. The Blue Planet effect we thought was just going to be a spike, and it's not. It's really sustainable. And what we've got to do is harness that momentum, make sure it is sensibly profitable in a sustainable way that is going to give us an industry that's going to deal with the problems in the long run, not just in the short run.
Well, thank you very much. Now, of course, harnessing momentum means something slightly different in the Labour Party these days. But we'll pass on from political jokes. The reason we're called SERA, the Socialist Environment and Resources Association, is because we've always felt very strongly that the discussion about something that you call rubbish or waste, that it is actually resources, and that's always been part of our DNA. That's why it's always been in our name. Although many people have said change it and call yourself Environment Labour rather than this obscure name. But we've always wanted to have resources in that. We may still change it, of course, at some point in the future. Now, I'm sure you've heard some really interesting contributions. I don't think all our speakers agree with each other. I'm pretty sure they come at it from different perspectives, but I think it's fantastic that we've had that range of views on what is such a serious problem. Now, it's your turn. Who wants to come in? I've seen one hand over there, and then one there. So I'm going to start with those three, and it's you with the glasses on top of your head first. And there are some roving microphones. And if you could just say your name and roughly where you're from.
Okay. My name's Diana. I'm here from Snowdonia National Park. So diolch yn fawr for mentioning the Welsh and what they're doing. But I'm also a campaigner. I'm a volunteer for Sea Shepherd UK. We have hundreds of volunteers around the country picking up this rubbish that you are talking about. We have very qualified divers who are trying to lift 3-4 layers of net at their own risk, on their own time, from the fishing industry, which hasn't even been touched on here. When we've done targeted surveys on our local beaches, which if you've been there, you know we have no industry there. We are literally in the middle of nowhere. 46% of that, which I believe is in global conjunction with global figures, is lost fishing gear. And I don't hear that conversation happening. I didn't hear that conversation happening 3-4 years ago at the Green Party conference. And I was told that no, that conversation was not happening. We have umpteen takeaways in our area who are still using polystyrene. We've been told to go away and concentrate on the big businesses and leave the little boys alone. And they won't stop using it until you ban it. The plastic bag charge, great. I mean, I think it's dropped use by 80%. But in our local co-op, we're still seeing them go out by the thousands. We have marine litter displays that we have put in very prominent places. And, you know, I'm a mum of 3. This is my kids' air. We've got a 50% drop in phytoplankton since the 1970s, a direct link to the amount of plastic getting into our oceans. We have an ultra-rare shark on the IUCN Red List, 100 metres off our shore, and yet we still cannot get this stuff out of our local takeaways. I would like to see from the government and the people who are making these laws an environmental framework that every single business has to adhere to before they get an operating licence. From the small takeaways to the big boys, it has to come top down because we are breaking our shoulders, literally ground up. I'm
going to stop you there because that's quite a long question, if you don't mind me stopping you. So quite a lot about marine and marine litter, which I'll ask for some comments on, and then also what can we do about takeaways and making sure that we're properly licensing and controlling. I think both two very good points. Some other things in there, but I'm going to drill you down to those two. There was somebody over here in the yellow lanyard. If it's not on, just shout, maybe.
My name's Megan Rowland. I work for the Charity Tier Fund. So it's really great to hear from you, Sandy, about the labour waste policy. It's going to be coming out soon. Looking forward to reading that. And from you, Anna, about EPR. We've recently launched a report which looks at how plastic pollution is affecting people in developing countries, where the report found that there's one person is dying every 30 seconds from mismanaged waste. And we've currently got a campaign trying to get multinational companies to take responsibility for the plastic waste that they're creating in developing countries. So I'd be really interested in hearing how the panel sees that side of the issue, and also how a Labour government would approach that issue.
Okay, I think I'm going to stop there because that is actually 3 questions just between the two of you. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to start with Sandy and then go to Anna first and then see if anyone wants to come in. So marine, control of takeaways, and then what can we do about the rubbish around the rest of the world and taking responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, general litter is a serious issue. It's an educational issue. It's an issue about the way in which we now very often purchase things on the go, whereas we used to sit down and eat meals at home. And it is also an issue about the types of packaging that people are throwing around. The interesting fact from, or what appears to be a fact, I'm still finding it hard to believe, but I'm seeing lots of statistics which make it clear that it is true around the deposit return schemes in countries like Germany, is that they are so effective, and that includes plastic bottles which people in other countries would just throw into the hedgerow or drop or whatever. You have to have a deposit return which is sufficiently high to encourage people to return their bottles. But of course, it also encourages other people to return bottles that the people who are not that fussed about the deposit return. I mean, I'm actually old enough. The first action I ever took part in, first political action or environmental action I ever took part in as a teenager, as a young teenager, was a campaign against Corona dropping its deposit return scheme on its glass pop bottles. That sort of ages me a bit. But we used to go round and pick up bottles. If you saw a bottle under a hedgerow or something like that, you picked it up and you took it back because you got threepence back. Actually, not many people here who can remember what a threepence looks like either. So that works for litter. For fishing debris, I'm not sure what the answer is. I think there are all sorts of areas in which we need to have a greater sense of responsibility for businesses, small and medium-sized businesses as well as larger businesses, in order to make sure that they do not externalize their costs. And I think with the fishing industry, that is one area where maybe there is not enough regulation and incentive for people in the fishing industry to do the right thing. And finally, on developing countries, I just say, Megan, I very, very seldom find myself thinking, oh, that's a good idea, when it's being put forward by a Conservative minister. But I was listening to the I think she got on the wrong side of Theresa May, so goodness knows whether she'd be on the right side of Boris Johnson, Minister for Overseas Aid, who was saying, actually, this is an area where we should be using British money to help clear up the mess in some third world countries, because an awful lot of that mess was created by us in the first place. We need to do that, and actually if we were to do that, we would also be helping to develop the technologies we need to clear up the environment around our own seas as well.
Anna, did you want to come in on those?
Thank you. Absolutely, marine and our waste, our local waste, is a huge, huge issue. And that's something that I've taken account of in developing and bringing forward my bill and in the conversations that I have. I have a solution, Sandy, and that is for the front bench to take forward my bill in its entirety and make it front bench policy, because what that does is that ensures that producers are fully responsible for full costs of collection, recycling, treatment, disposal, including all costs of littering. So that is needed. There's also the need to have a one-stop shop, one single body, I think, that is responsible for looking at innovation, looking at where the industry is working, looking at how our marine life is being affected, and the export of our waste. That then leads me on to your question here, which is, yes, our waste is being distributed in the oceans, in the seas, and it's affecting people across the world, and in those very difficult communities. And those are causing illness and death. We need to be taking responsibility, and that starts with our government, that starts with our legislation. We need to be doing that, and we need to be holding people to account. So there's far, and I just want to hold Viridor a little bit to account here, because although you're doing some good work, we need to challenge this system, and it needs fundamental reform, absolutely fundamental reform. And the UK government is going nowhere near that waste strategy. It talks a little bit about the good things. It goes nowhere near the fundamental shift and reform we need to start making the changes we need to see.
Well, I don't want fighting on the panel. But I saw in the white shirt and the blue, and I've just asked the other panelists to hold any thoughts about those first two questions. White shirt, blue jacket, and then purple shirt. We'll take a couple more questions, and then we'll bring more panelists back in. But no fighting, obviously.
Hi, my name is Ben Carpenter. I'm from Policy Connect. Is it not high time that now that Labour's committed to a 2030 net zero target, that it commits to a 2030 net zero plastic exports target, as recommended in this report, which I'm pleased to say Anna was a signatory to?
Okay, so that's a very clear question. And in the purple shirt, have you got the microphone's just over there?
Yes, thank you. Really just to say what can be done about plastic wrapping in relation to what we buy in supermarkets, I'm really noting the fact that most of the recycling cost goes down to local authorities, even though where people are buying the plastic in the supermarket. Now, is there a way to get the supermarket to pay the cost of the recycling rather than the public council tax payer and shift it to the supermarket and the producer? How would you do that?
I have a feeling that Anna's bill might have some relevance. I think we're going to shamelessly plug the Anna McMorrin bill to become an act. Was there somebody else? Did I see another hand that was over here?
Richard McElwain, keeper at Tanya. I'm also a trustee of Thames 21 as well. We've got a petition running at the moment, both through Greenpeace, in coalition Greenpeace, and through Change.org to introduce the latte levy, or cook charges we're calling it. So it'd be really nice to understand whether the Labour government would commit to introduce that as a very specific measure. And also just a question maybe for Viridor as well, as there's a lot of focus now on things like low temperature chemical recycling of plastic. And it seems to me if we introduce a deposit return scheme and those sorts of technologies, we do have a solution to endlessly recycle useful plastics rather than demonising some of the plastics that actually may be better than switching to aluminium. So I'd be interested on an opinion in that.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Tanya to see if she wants to comment on anything, then come to Anna, who may mention her bill, and then go along.
Yeah, I think the type of plastic you're talking about in supermarkets and the access. I mean, we don't know in the Thames how things end up there, and being able to transfer it. You know, waste collection is a classic. Depending on the local borough, we often get it was waste day to day, and half of it ended up down the street because of the foxes. So I think if we can scale that back at that point, that would be a much easier process to reduce going forward. But I think we will always be at the bottom of that solution, and we will always support the change further up the stream before it ends up in the tidal Thames.
Yeah, well, just on local authorities, so I would shift the burden, the financial burden currently placed on local authorities. There needs to be a whole new system which takes that market away. At the moment, the market is in the compliance organisations who take all the profits, and then the local authorities and the taxpayer pay for the clean-up of the waste. That needs to shift, which is why we need that huge fundamental shift in the way that waste works, and a central body looking at that, held account and scrutinised, would look to innovation, clean up, and also jobs in that waste industry, because don't forget this is a huge area which could create a huge amount of green jobs, which we'd want to see, and a shift in our economy. So,
thank you.
And it's in my bill.
And I'm going to go along to Julian at the other end, and then we're going to come back by Paul to Sandra.
Okay, thank you. Well, there's quite a few things, so I suppose in no particular order. As long as the current government is in power, and if we carry on, I don't know how to put this, but if we carry on with Brexit, who knows what's happening? But on
we
current,
got so far through this
I know,
evening.
and then one person said it. I was going to say B word, but I thought said it.
And someone on the panel had to swear.
Did I do that?
Yes.
Whoops.
Right,
Sorry.
swearing.
Oh, okay. We have an environment bill. The environment bill is the big game in town right now in terms of dealing with all things environmental and regulation, because 80% of environmental governance was coming out of Europe. And a Labour government delivering on the B word presumably would bring forward a similar piece of legislation, an environment bill, because something has to do that to cover for what would be missing. The environment bill being the only game in town, the task has to be for front bench to take brilliant pieces of legislation like Anna's, like Friends of the Earth's plastic pollution bill, Friends of the Earth and the WI leading that, but many others behind it, but two, and basically copy and paste it into the environment bill. The job has to be to say to the government, this is how you deal with plastic pollution properly. This is how you deal with producer responsibility, not just for plastic, is it? It's for waste generally. It's for the materials you make and market generally. And all manner of other things. The Environment Bill currently is looking to have a very, very weak regulator in there. Very, very little power to hold the government to account. So, effective legislation, like Anna's bill to deal with supermarkets, packaging and such like the plastic pollution bill modelled on the Climate Change Act that would deal with plastic polluting emissions from all sorts of sources, including, of course marine, which are absolutely right, that is a really important area. And there are things that we can do right now. Electronic tagging of nets, deposit return schemes on nets, loaning systems rather than sale of nets. All of these things would incentivise not just the return of the net you're using whole, but actually fishing nets out of the water and bringing them back. Those are the sorts of things that an expert committee would be asking government, to do. Brilliant work by Tier Fund and that report. Really hats off to that. It's really, really important. It is a massive, massive issue, human issue all around the world as well. And just on the point of plastic exports and investment and overseas aid, scandalously, overseas aid money is going to the companies that make plastic overseas rather than the companies who are innovating in how we can do with less plastic. So actually, there's a lot that needs to be looked at, at that part of the debate as well. How we're investing overseas as well as what we're exporting overseas. I think I've said enough. I'd love to say much more. Apart from Friends of the Earth is actually doing a lot of work on takeaways, and we're developing that. So I'd like just to plug a sort of watch this space on that, because that's also a whole area that we could switch to reuse largely. The UK is by far the largest takeaway on-the-go food market in Europe. I think it might actually be bigger than all the other countries put together. It's uniquely massive in this country, and there's a real challenge for us in shifting away from single-use and throwaway.
One takeaway from Friends of the Earth is the work on takeaways.
Set you up.
Yes, yeah. So
there's a direct challenge from the floor, but there's also been a challenge from Anna. I'd like you to answer that. I heard the slapping of a gauntlet on the
Well, the one thing I'd say in response to the supermarkets point, I think it is having a proper, well-policed, well-thought-through, extended producer's responsibility regime. Because until that comes into place, there will be no incentive for real change. Because at the moment, people just go out and buy the PRNs they need, and it's a financial transaction. It's not changing any behaviour. By not changing any behaviour, we're not changing the redesign of packaging. So we're not getting the brand leaders involved who actually have to fundamentally change the way they produce things. So that, to me, is the first one. The second one, which we are seeing an impact of even now, is the potential plastic tax that's coming in April 2022, in theory, where unless 30% of your recycled plastic in your packaging is recycled, then you're going to face an increased tax. That has caught the attention of the brand leaders. The P&Gs, the Unilevers are all front and centre of this debate now. And that is, again, going to get some real momentum into it, because if you've got those people playing in this space, then you can get some material change quickly. And then the final point I'll make is continued pressure on the CSR agenda. All the big companies now are absolutely focused on the public perception of their CSR agenda, correctly so. And that's got to be continued. The push has still got to carry on, whether it's through legislation or self-policing. But again, that's going to make change. With respect to your point, I would say we are, no one said to us, you've got to go and build a polymers plant. We're doing that off our own bat. There's no legislation that's saying you need to do that, Viridor. So we are trying to contribute actively in the solution. I don't know what more you would want us to be doing, apart from trying to educate the people we work with.
Join the coalition for my bill.
We'll pick that up. We'll pick that up outside.
I think I can hear another. I can hear the other glove from the pair of gauntlets now has gone onto the table. I think I'm going to have to draw this to a close, because we have actually slightly gone past 7 o'clock. But I'm going to bring Sandy in to answer the specific point about are we ready in Labour to pick up that new challenge. But can I just say, if any of you are not actually members of SERA, please do join. fine. It's really important that we carry on the work that we've been doing to push the party from asking it to not go forward with embracing nuclear through to everything else that we've been doing on waste and resources and across the entire environment agenda. Do join SERA if you're not already a member. But the last word is going to go to Sandy. Now, what about picking up that challenge over there?
Okay, so, I mean, first of all, Labour is a democratic party, so I can't just come along here and make up Labour policy for myself. I am really sorry about that.
Go on.
However, having said that, there are certain principles in the strategy that I've been working up over the last 9 months, which I cannot believe we will not be going ahead with. And the two that I want to mention, first of all, we need a massive increase in the recycling recovery infrastructure that we have in this country. It is ridiculous that so much of the stuff that could be recycled is actually not able to be recycled in this country simply because we do not have the infrastructure. And I'm not just talking about plastics, I'm talking about food waste, I'm talking about other things as well. So that sort of industrial investment very, very much goes ahead along with the green industrial revolution that we intend to bring in with the next Labour government. And the second thing is extended producer responsibility. The beauty of an extended producer responsibility system is not just that it enables the producers of things that become waste to pay the people who have to deal with the waste, which gives you the income stream that you need in order to be able to do the best possible thing with the waste. It also incentivizes the producers not to produce the waste in the first place. And so for both of those reasons, I think an EPR system is the way forward. It needs to be absolutely watertight, it needs to work with the industry, and it needs to be able to actually pay for the best possible outcome for the waste that is created. A large part of the problem with the PRNs and PRNs is that it didn't actually incentivize the best possible outcome, it incentivizes the cheapest possible outcome. But if we can get the EPR system working the way that I know Anna wants it to work, and the way that I know that Rebecca Long-Bailey and other people in the Labour Party front bench want it to work, then I think that will be a major part of our waste strategy going forward.
Well, thank you very much. Can you show your appreciation to our very diverse panel? I think this has been a great event. Thank you so much for your fantastic questions, pushing the panel. They've come here from very different perspectives, and I think that's one of the things that's good about SERA, is that we've brought everybody into this room, and I think we've had a really interesting debate and discussion. I think you can see Labour is pushing forward on this in many different ways. Thank you.